Hello, my dear students. I'm back again. My name is Himal Handu, and today I shall be with you for Class 11 English Core from the NCERT textbook Snapshots. This is Part 2 of Chapter 6, The Ghat of the Only World by Amitav Ghosh. Now let's recapitulate what we learned in our previous session. We learned about the author Amitav Ghosh. Then we went on to learn about the theme of the story, which is about friendship, about commitment. Then we discussed the main characters of the story, that is Agha Shahid Ali and Amitav Ghosh himself. And then I went on to tell you the story in brief. And by the end of the session, I gave you 2 special questions to ponder over. I hope you have worked on them. Let me begin by discussing about the first question. When and where did Agha Shahid Ali talk of his death? This was my first question to you. And I did give you a small clue in my brief about the story. So Agha Shahid Ali spoke to the narrator about his approaching death in April 2001. So the narrator telephoned that he was coming to his apartment to pick him up. They had to go to a friend's house for lunch. Although they had talked a great deal over the last many weeks, Shahid never touched upon the subject of death. Okay, then I gave you another question which was based on vocabulary. I gave you a statement. Shahid's gregariousness had no limit. And I asked you to look up the word meaning of gregariousness. I hope you've worked on that. I am a very gregarious person. That means I am a very social person. I get along well with most people. And Shahid was a very gregarious person. He was social. There was never an evening when there was not a party in his living room. There were always some people gathered inside. So there were writers, there were relatives, there were poets. Someone would be always cooking, someone would be making tea in the kitchen. So almost to the very end of his life, he was the center of an endless mela of talk, laughter, food, and of course, poetry. So dear students, let me now go to the story in detail. A little more detail about what happens to Agha Shahid Ali. As I mentioned in my previous session, he was a Kashmiri settled in the US, a person suffering from cancer. He had been under treatment for 14 months, but he was still on his feet and cheerful. Only sometimes he became unconscious or lost his memory and his eyesight for a short while. That's why in April 2001, on 25th of April, he spoke to Amitav Ghosh about his approaching death. And the writer, obviously, he tried to console him, but he was cut short by Shahid. So Shahid made a request on that day. He wanted Amitav to write something about him after his death. Shahid and the author Amitav Ghosh had studied together at Delhi University, but they had never met. In 1998 and 1999, they had several conversations on the phone, and they also met a couple of times. But the acquaintance could not grow until both moved to Brooklyn in the US. They lived in the same neighborhood. Shahid lived in a building about 8 blocks away. Once He had a sudden blackout in February 2000. He was diagnosed with a malignant brain tumor. So from Manhattan, he moved to Brooklyn, where his youngest sister, Samita, lived. When Shahid spoke about his approaching death, he laughed, but he was dead serious. He entrusted a great responsibility to the author. "You must write about me," he said, and the author promised to grant his wish. And as I discussed in the very last session, the whole story, the theme of the story is about friendship and commitment. And that's why the author started recording all the conversations he had with Shahid. Shahid was a poet who wrote in English, and the author had read his 1997 collection, The Country About a Post Office. And Amitav Ghosh was greatly impressed. Once they became neighbors, he began to meet him more often for meals. Shahid's condition was serious, but the most interesting part was that the illness did not depress him. This is something we all need to learn from the character of Shahid. The author and Shahid had many common friends. They shared a love for Rogan Josh, a special dish of Kashmir, a liking for the songs of Roshanara Begum and Kishore Kumar. Both hated cricket, but they both loved old Mumbai films. One day the author went along with Shahid's brother and sister, Iqbal and Hina, to fetch him home from the hospital. It happened to be the 21st of May. Shahid had already been through several operations which had failed. In the hospital, he could see him on a wheelchair. But Shahid sent him back. He believed he could walk out of the hospital on his own. But his knees buckled after only a few steps. That means he could not even walk. So he was brought back to the wheelchair. Shahid loved company. As I mentioned earlier, he was a very gregarious person. He loved people, he was social, he loved partying, he loved shared meals. He didn't have time to be depressed. His apartment was on the 7th floor, but it was worth going all the way up. There was this fragrance of Rogan Josh and songs to welcome any visitor. Shahid would open the door and clap his hands happily whenever he saw someone. There were poets, students, writers sitting in his house forever. Even though his health was failing, he loved to talk, loved to laugh, eat, and of course, enjoy poetry. His deep interest in kitchen matched with his skill as a poet. James Merrill had a great influence on his poetry. Shahid was not a fanatic. Though he was in Kashmir, he regretted that the Pandits had left Kashmir, and he expressed that feeling in his poetry. He loved Bengali food also, and no wonder he was associated with Amitav Ghosh. He loved poetry of Begum Akhtar. Once at Barcelona airport, the security guard, a woman, asked him what he did. His answer was that he was a poet. Finally, the woman asked him if he was carrying anything that could be dangerous to other passengers. Shahid said, "Only my heart." So Shahid was a very popular teacher. He taught in many colleges. He lived in America. His parents continued to live in Srinagar. And in his childhood, he once created a Hindu temple, which I talked about in my previous session as well. Finally, he left us on 8th December and he died peacefully. This is the story in detail, and I shall leave you with this, and we shall meet again in the next session tomorrow. Bye-bye. Have a good day.